Hello guys, buenos días, buenas tardes, or buenas noches, and welcome to our very last Spanish 101 video. So yes, when you're done with watching this and doing the activity, you'll be done with the semester. Before we start with this last topic, I want to emphasize yet again that there will be no final exam for this class. The grades will come from your attendance and participation, which counts both your attendance when the class was face-to-face and the activities you have sent me. So that's one category, attendance and participation. The other one is the midterm, and the other one is the quizzes that we did during that first half of the semester. Okay, that's it. Also, for those of you who are still somewhat nervous that you're behind, don't worry. As I have said before, the deadline for sending me activities from the online part of the semester is the 22nd of May, so that I can have 3 days to submit grades. Hopefully I will have everything before that, because I would really like to be able to upload your grades to Blackboard before I send them to the college, so that you can see them, and if anybody feels the need to, although I don't think that will happen because I'm being very generous, but if anybody feels the need to, we can discuss your grade. And also take into account that the college is giving you the option of switching from a regular grade to a pass-fail grade without affecting your GPA, if you choose to do so. So there's always that option. But I think you can decide that on an individual course basis, and I think that many of you are going to be very happy with your Spanish 101 grades. Okay, so let's move on to the very last topic. It's called in Spanish verbos reflexivos, or reflexive verbs. Basically, I'm going to show you one last group of verbs. But don't worry, I hope that with this lesson you will come to realize shortly that this is not too bad. It's actually fairly simple. So let me start by talking about a verb that we already talked about when we did the E to IE stem changing verbs. Despertar, right? And I'm going to show you an image in which something is happening that can be described using this verb, right? So despertar means to wake up, right? And here we have something going on. There's this one guy still sleeping, right? His alarm, his clock is ringing, but it doesn't seem to be able to wake him up. So someone else, I guess a roommate or brother, comes into his room and wakes him up, right? This person wakes the other person up. Let's give them names. Let's say that Marcos is the one that is shaking the guy, and the sleeping guy is Lucas. So I want to say in Spanish what is going on here. Now, who is the subject of our action here? Who is doing the action? Well, it's Marcos, right? That's the one that's shaking the other guy, right? He's waking the other up, so that would be our subject. And then our direct object would be Lucas, right? He is being woken up. And since it's Marcos that is doing the action, we would need the el form of the verb, right? Because he wakes up the other guy, right? So the right form of the verb is despierta, right? Why despierta and not desperta? Well, because it's an E to IE stem changing verb, right? So the sentence in Spanish is Marcos despierta a Lucas, right? Marcos is our subject, he does the action. Lucas is our direct object. And despierta is the right conjugation of the verb. Marcos wakes Lucas up. About that well, I hope you recall that when we did direct objects, I gave you a rule in Spanish that when the direct object of an action is a person, you always use that little word before the direct object, that right? That preposition. So Marcos despierta a Lucas, you would translate that as Marcos wakes Lucas up. Okay? Now let's look at another image in which something is happening that can be described with this verb despertar as well. Right? But here we don't have anybody waking her up. We have a little girl that is waking up by herself. Right? In Spanish, how would you say this? You would say la niña se despierta, which in English you would translate by the girl wakes up, or if you want to be absolutely clear about what's going on in here, you could also say the girl wakes herself up, right? This sounds a little clunky in English, right? You just say she wakes up and you understand that it's nobody waking her up but herself, right? She does the action and she's also the recipient of the action, right? Well, if you think about it here, in this second case, there's something peculiar happening, right? It's not like the first image where we have one subject that is doing the action and another separate object that is receiving the action. In the second image, in which the girl wakes up, the subject of the action is the girl, and the recipient of the action, the one that is woken up, the direct object of the action, is the girl as well, right? This is what we know in Spanish as a reflexive verb, a verb in which the subject and the direct object are one and the same. So this verb in Spanish would not be despertar, it would be despertarse, which means to wake up, or if you want to be strict, you can translate it as to wake oneself up. Okay? This is just an introduction, right? Let's move on to a more detailed explanation of reflexive verbs. Reflexive verbs are verbs in which the subject of the action, the person who does the action, and the direct object of the action, the person or people who receive the action, are the same. And the thing is that in English, you use the self pronouns to signal these actions, right? Let me give you 3 examples that will hopefully make it a little bit more understandable what I mean by reflexive verbs. He embarrassed himself. Let's say that, I don't know, he woke up, he went to hostos for class, he entered the Italian classroom, and he realized he had no pants on, right? Your typical school nightmare, right? Well, he's clearly embarrassing someone when he enters a classroom with no pants. Who is he embarrassing? Himself, right? The one embarrassing someone and the someone being embarrassed are one and the same person, right? So in English, you would say he embarrassed himself, and that himself signals that the person receiving the action, the person doing it, are the same person, right? The second one, I hope, is even more clear. She teaches herself Italian. Let's say that she wants to learn the language, right? But she has no access to classes, no professor. She just downloads Duolingo and watches stuff online, right? And she teaches herself, maybe buys a textbook, right? So the person doing the teaching and the person being taught are the same person. So she teaches herself, okay? Clearly, in this case, the person who does the action and the person who receives the action are the same. A third example, sorry, I've been watching a lot of zombie movies during the pandemic. right? They saved themselves from the zombies. They aren't helped by anybody else, right? They're alone in this post-apocalyptic world, but they're strong, they're resilient, and they save themselves. No one else saves them, they save themselves, right? The ones saving people and the people being saved are the same. That is a reflexive verb, okay? So in English, you use these self pronouns, this himself, herself, yourself, myself, themselves, right? To signal these reflexive actions. In Spanish, we also have a way of signaling reflexive actions, but it's very different. We use a special infinitive and a new set of pronouns. But other than that, the conjugation is the same as the ones we have studied. So let's look in more detail at these two things that you need to use for reflexive verbs. The first one is the infinitive. And I hope you remember that we said that the infinitive is the form of the verb in which no one is doing an action, right? We're just referring to the action in general. And in Spanish, infinitives always end with ar, ar, er, er, or ir, ir, right? Well, reflexive verbs add a couple more letters to that ending to signal that it is a reflexive action, and those letters are SE. So let's think about the reflexive verb I showed you in the previous slide. It was despertarse. If you look at it carefully, you will see that it's just a normal ar verb, despertar, and then you add the SE to signal that it's reflexive. Okay? So that's what reflexive verbs are in the infinitive form. They're normal verbs, but they just have that SE at the end. And that signals that it's reflexive. Okay? That's one rule. And the second rule is that reflexive verbs are conjugated just like normal verbs, with the important difference that before the verb you add these little words called reflexive pronouns. Okay? I know that is a little abstract, so let's look at some concrete examples, and I hope this will show you that it's not that difficult. So we have an image here of someone waking up, similar to the one we looked at in the first slide of this presentation, right? And we said, how did we say that we say wake up in Spanish? To wake yourself up, right? The reflexive action, it's despertarse. We also said that despertar is an E to IE stem changing verb, right? We said that when we studied that group of stem changing verbs, right? So with that knowledge that this is reflexive and that it is an E to IE stem changing verb, let's look at the actual conjugation. It's right here in this table. Let's look first at the third column from left to right. Those are the verbal forms, right? What is going on here? First, let's look at the endings. O, as, a, amos, an. What are those endings? I hope you remember that these are just your standard endings for are verbs. How do we know which endings to use? Look at the infinitive again. Despertarse. That a, it signals that it is an are verb. So we just used those endings. Now, still in the third column, let's look at what comes before the endings. We have despiert almost everywhere, except for nosotros. What is going on here? Well, it's the same thing that we have been doing with the other verbs. We first got rid of the ending of the infinitive, right? In this case, we did not get rid of just 2 letters, we got rid of 4. Why? Well, because you add that SE at the end of the reflexive verb, right? So you get rid of the ar or the er or the ir, and you also get rid of the se. 4 letters, right? If you do that, you're left with despert, right? But this is an E to IE stem changing verb. So that second E of the stem changes to IE, right? Where? Well, everywhere but for nosotros. That is just the standard rule for stem changing verbs. The stem changes everywhere but for nosotros, right? So actually, everything that is happening in that last column is stuff that we already know. Are endings and a stem changing verb. Now the central column, that's the one that is not yet familiar to us. Those are the little words that are referred to as reflexive pronouns. Right? And the first column is what? It's the subjects, the people that do the action, right? And it's just our standard subjects in Spanish, right? The ones we always put in these little conjugation tables. So the only new information here, the only actually new information is the middle column. Those are the reflexive pronouns. And we put them before the actual verb. And that's it. So if you look at this table, you will see that there's a structure that all reflexive verbs follow when they're conjugated. First we have the subject who does the action. Then we have a reflexive pronoun. And finally, we just have a normal conjugation. Right? That's it. This is how reflexive verbs work. Let's look at another one. I know this clip art is rather lame, but it was the only one I don't know. So let's think about this one for a second. The verb in Spanish for getting out of bed is also reflexive. Okay? Levantarse. Levantarse. That means to get out of bed, or, you know, if you want to be strict about the translation, to get yourself out of bed. Okay? Now, if we get rid of the SE, we will see that the verb is levantar, which is just a normal ar verb. Okay? This is not a stem changing verb, it's just a normal ar verb. So how do we conjugate this thing? Same thing again, 3 columns. Let's look at the last column for starters, right? We have levant everywhere. Where did that come from? We got rid of 4 letters. We were left with levant. That is our stem. This is not a stem changing verb, so it appears everywhere. Fairly simple. Let's look at the endings. O, as, a, amos, an. Where did we get those endings? Are endings, right? We already know those, right? And let's look at the middle column. Those are the reflexive pronouns, right? Let's stop for a little bit longer here and look carefully at that middle column. You will realize that those pronouns are changing depending on who does the action, right? So that is the one thing you actually need to learn. Which pronoun to use for which subject? For yo, it is me. For tú, it is te. For él and ella, it is se. For nosotros, it's nos. And for ustedes, and also ellos, it is se, right? And again, remember the structure. First you have the subject, then you have the reflexive pronoun, and then at the end you have the normal conjugation. So how would you translate this thing? Yo me levanto. Well, I get out of bed, right? Or if you want to be like super strict with the translation, you can, you know, make it very clear that you're getting yourself out of bed, right? I get myself out of bed. I know that sounds a little silly in English, right? But in Spanish, we are marking very clearly that the person doing the action and the person receiving it are the same, right? Yo me levanto. Tú te levantas, you get out of bed. Él se levanta, he gets out of bed. Ella se levanta, she gets out of bed. Nosotros nos levantamos, we get out of bed. Ustedes se levantan, you guys get out of bed. And then ellos se levantan, they get out of bed. Okay? Again, the only actual new information you have here is the middle column. Those are known as the reflexive pronouns. One last example. What is this guy doing? He's shaving. How do you say to shave? To shave yourself, I guess, when you are the person being shaved and the person shaving at the same time. You say afeitarse. Afeitarse. This is a good word for practicing Spanish open vowels. Afeitarse. Afeitarse. You get rid of the SE, you see afeitar, which is a normal ar verb. So how does this one go? So I said it's a normal ar verb, right? So when we get rid of the ending, we have afeit. And that's the same throughout. The stem does not change. We have o, as, a, amos, an, because we said this is an ar verb, right? Afeitar, say. And then we just have the reflexive pronouns. Me for yo, te for tú, se for él and ella, nos for nosotros, se for ustedes, and again, se for ellos. And the same structure we studied. Subject, reflexive pronoun, normal conjugation. Okay? So what do you actually have to learn? The reflexive pronouns, or in Spanish, los pronombres reflexivos. They're here in this little table. For yo it is me, for tú it is te, for él and ella it is se, for nosotros it is nos, for ustedes it is se, again for ellos it is se. You will probably have noticed already that we're using se a lot, right? We're using se for él, for ella, for ustedes, and for ellos. So actually, when it comes to reflexive verbs, we in Spanish do tend to say the subject a lot, right? Just because if we don't say it, it can be ambiguous, right? Okay. So what is the activity? It's very simple. I'm going to send you in the email and in the announcement that will include the link to this video, 2 reflexive verbs. I will tell you whether these reflexive verbs are ar or or ir verbs. I will tell you whether they're stem changing, right? So I'll give you all the rules. And I'll only ask you to send me the tables with the correct conjugation for these 2 verbs. So you can easily use any of the previous slides, right, as reference, right? Conjugate those correctly, send them my way, and you'll be done with Spanish 101 in the spring of 2020. I hope you like the sound of those words, right? And that's it. It has been actually a pleasure teaching you guys. It has been very bittersweet because I thought we had a very good dynamic in those first weeks of class, and then we just had to suddenly and unexpectedly switch to online instruction. I'm the first to admit that I'm not an expert at this. I think you guys have noticed that I've been learning slowly as the semester progresses. But, I hope that you did not find this second online half of the semester too boring and that you feel you learned a little bit, right? And I also hope that you have been able to do all the work for your other classes and that you will have time during this week of finals to finish everything. And my congratulations to those of you who will be graduating, because I know several of you will be. Gracias. And again, the 22nd of May is the final deadline for sending me activities for this class. And by now I think I have everyone's midterm, so that's a very good thing, okay? Gracias, muchachos. Hasta luego. Have a great summer. Bye-bye.